Hello everyone! Today we're going to take a look at the classic 1953 film, The War of the Worlds. Produced by George Pal and directed by Byron Haskin for Paramount Pictures, this was the first screen adaptation of H.G. Wells's seminal science fiction novel of the same name about a Martian invasion of planet Earth. What appears to be a meteor crashes in a town in Southern California. The excited locals gather to take a look at the cooling object, joined by a scientist who happens to be camping nearby. But curiosity and optimism about what may be inside turns to fear when a machine emerges and starts blasting people with its heat ray. The military quickly mobilizes, but every action they take proves useless, and as more machines appear and start wiping out cities around the globe, it begins to look like humanity doesn't stand a chance against this indestructible and intelligent Martian force. I had seen The War of the Worlds before, probably a couple times, but the last time was quite a while ago. It could be as many as 20 years. For over a year now, I've felt like rewatching it, but I decided I should reread the book first. If I was ever going to read it again, I wanted to do so without the movie being fresh on my mind. So a couple months ago, I reread the book and I reviewed it, and if I had been on the fence about watching the 53 film before, the positive response I got from you absolutely would have persuaded me to go ahead. As it turns out, while there were certain images and events in the movie that I recognized, in many ways, this was like watching it for the first time all over again. Any film collectors watching have already ascertained that this is the 2005 DVD version. This is the version I watched, not the 2020 Blu-ray release of the 4K restoration from Criterion. I have heard positive things about the restoration, but the older DVD is what was readily available to me, and besides, I don't have the means to get screen caps and clips from a Blu-ray. I'm not bothered by this, and I hope no one else is. Frankly, I have looked at stills from the two versions, and I don't mind that the colors on the DVD are slightly faded by comparison. The restoration coloring is actually so bright and saturated that I think it might bother my eyes. As for the wires, I didn't find them so glaringly obvious here in shots where they're visible, especially when I was watching the movie on TV. On a laptop where you're closer to the screen, they are more discernible. If you're someone who looks for the wires and finds them an eyesore, you would probably prefer the restoration, which undoes the damage of decades of reformatting and degradation and makes the wires invisible as they originally were. Speaking for myself, though, as someone who is not a quality elitist and is kind of a dinosaur, I liked this version just fine. It didn't bother my eyes, and it looks great. The DVD print of this nearly 68-year-old film was more than good enough to wow me. The War of the Worlds boasts some of the best special effects work of the 1950s. It was filmed in glorious Technicolor, which was quite a boon for a science fiction film. Technicolor was more commonly reserved for grandiose musicals and epics. The movie uses it to the fullest advantage, even tricking the viewer at first by beginning with a black and white newsreel-style opener with footage from the two world wars before cutting to the title in bold red font. I completely forgot about this, so the intro had me a little worried. I was glancing over at my mom and thinking, isn't this movie supposed to be in color? Am I going crazy? The font color changes from red to green, and the rest of the main titles appear in varying colors, occasionally flashing like lightning while Leith Stevens' exciting music plays. This energetic prologue is followed by the astronomical sequence featuring the awe-inspiring art of painter Chesley Bonestell. Sir Cedric Hardwicke narrates, speaking lines taken from the first chapter of the novel, as we catch an extraterrestrial's view of each of the planets, minus Venus. Just imagine being a kid in 1953 and seeing this in the theater. From this broad scale, the perspective narrows, following one apparent meteor down to Earth's surface. It's not long before some of the famous Martian imagery is introduced. 3 onlookers are left alone to guard the meteor. They watch as a hatch begins to unscrew, the first sign of Martian life. The sound design here is fantastic, and somehow the camera's slow push forward makes the unscrewing even more intimidating. This part scared the heck out of me when I was a little kid, and I still find it unnerving. Seeing that cobra-like head rise, I'm transported back 20 years. Now I'm more curious about props and effects and things, but when I was a little kid, I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. I was thinking, that looks just like a snake, and I hate snakes. I still hate snakes, so the effect is the same. That recognition of the similarity to a cobra is all it takes to convey the machine's sinister intent. I do admire the sleek design and smooth motion of the thing, though, and the whole first attack sequence is fantastic, with that awesome first blast.
We're friends, yeah!
Shortly after that, the iconic floating machines come out, and no doubt these are what most people remember first about the film. Even if they didn't end up being the tripods Wells described, it didn't work out, they're still very impressive, designed by Albert Nozaki, who modeled them after not just cobras, but manta rays and swans. They were constructed out of copper and suspended and manipulated with wires, giving them that gravity-defying appearance. It's evident from the plot synopsis that Barry Lyndon's screenplay makes some significant changes, moving the story out of late Victorian England to then modern-day California, USA. Moving the time period forward allows for the use of updated technology and weaponry that didn't exist when the book was published in 1898. Heavy artillery, tanks, and planes are at the military's disposal here. That includes the Flying Wing, a tailless fixed-wing plane featured in a scene that uses real footage of a Northrop YB-49 test flight from the late 40s. The United States Air Force had actually scrapped this project by the time this film was made, which is probably why they were allowed to use this footage. Even so, the sequence showing off this uniquely designed forerunner of the B-2 stealth bomber is a thrilling one. Another weapon that didn't exist in 1898? The atomic bomb, which is what the Flying Wing is carrying. When everything else fails to deter the Martians, the US president makes the difficult decision to evacuate all civilians and drop the big one. I couldn't find confirmation of this, so I could be wrong, but I wondered if this was the earliest depiction of a nuclear bomb detonation in a fictitious film. Evacuees observe the blast from a distance while the main characters and the armed forces put on goggles and get covered in dust. In a scene that Independence Day totally copied, everyone waits breathlessly for the debris to clear so they can confirm the hit. The last-ditch effort, unfortunately, is a failure. Even the most powerful weapon then known to mankind is no match for the Martians' advanced technology. In addition to changing the setting, the screenplay also introduces a few characters for us to focus on, chiefly Dr. Clayton Forrester, the scientist played by Gene Barry, and Sylvia Van Buren, the young woman he meets at the crash site played by Anne Robinson. The film gives these two a little meet-cute. She's a fan of Dr. Forrester, but because he looks different than he did on the cover of Time magazine, she fails to recognize him in person. She's going on about how she wrote about his theories for her master's thesis, and he's like, yeah, I know him, he's not that great. Then he self-consciously reveals his identity, and she's embarrassed, but he helps her save face with this line.
You didn't wear glasses on the Time cover.
Ah, they're really for long distance. When I want to look at something closer, I take them off.
Smooth. So we get a possible love story injected here, as well as a little levity. Since nothing seems to be happening at the moment with the meteor, Sylvia invites Forrester to their Saturday night square dance. It's mid-dozy-do that the Martians zap their first victims, simultaneously shutting the dance down with a power outage that also stops everyone's watch. Unfortunately for Forrester, with everything happening so quickly, he doesn't get a chance to change his clothes for what seems like days, though how much time has actually passed is unclear. So in all these scenes where he's conferring with the Marines and doing important, serious things, he's stuck in the square dance outfit. Costumes were designed by the great Edith Head, by the way. Other characters include Les Tremayne's General Mann, who's in charge of military intelligence. I don't think the name Mann was an accident. There's a supporting performance from Robert Cornthwaite as Forrester's colleague. Classic horror movie buffs will recognize him as Dr. Carrington from 1951's The Thing. Should recognize him, I guess I ought to say. My mom kept pointing him out to me and saying, it's the guy from The Thing! And I just didn't see it until I went through the movie again on my laptop. He looks different in color and without the pointy beard. Another alumnus from The Thing is Paul Frees, the famous voice actor who appears here as the second radio reporter and also does the opening announcement voiceover, sounding very much like Orson Welles, and therefore I wasn't surprised to learn it was an impression, a tip of the hat to Orson Welles' infamous radio production of The War of the Worlds. And there's Sylvia's uncle, the pastor of a local church, played by Louis Martin. His character represents the addition of religious themes to the screenplay. Though H.G. Wells wasn't much of a theist himself, I wouldn't say that the novel is anti-religion. However, it does express criticism of those who find themselves in a crisis and put everything in God's hands, refusing to do anything to help themselves. And one of the most unlikable characters is the cowardly curate. The 53 movie goes in an entirely different direction. It's the Martians, not the narrator, who seem to criticize or mock man's religion. There's a line speculating that the Martians could destroy the Earth in 6 days, the same amount of time it took God to create it. In a tense scene, Sylvia's uncle, the antithesis of the cowardly curate, expresses his belief that the Martians' highly advanced state must indicate that they're even closer to the Creator than we are. Therefore, we should try to communicate with them and reason with them. No one agrees with this theory, so he approaches the machine himself, Bible in hand and murmuring the 23rd Psalm. Unfortunately, the Martians' response is swift annihilation. This could give you the idea that the movie's making a statement that the Martians are the true higher power and religion is useless against them. But the rest of the film says otherwise. Later at the farmhouse, Sylvia tells Forrester about getting lost as a little girl and seeking refuge in a church, praying that the one who loves her best would come find her. This is set up for the final act, in which Forrester, who's finally gotten a change of clothes, loses his truck and its vital cargo to a violent, panicked mob. He runs through deserted streets searching desperately for Sylvia before remembering her story. Then he begins checking every church, and sure enough, he finds her in a crowd of anxious people seeking solace and praying for a miracle. When the machine that's about to wipe them out suddenly shuts down, it sure seems like they get that miracle, and as the Martians begin to fall, church bells ring out around the city. Wells didn't have anything like this in his novel, but in both book and film, the narrators do attribute defeat to divine intervention, the bacteria that was put on Earth long ago by God in his wisdom for this very purpose. In some ways, I do think the film follows the book rather well, capturing the introductory mood and the pop-up carnival atmosphere at the meteor site where people are taking pictures and joking about making money off the thing. Like in the book, 2 characters end up trapped in a house surrounded by Martians, though for less time and with a very different outcome. And maybe this one's a stretch, but there's a shot of horses running away at the machine's approach that reminded me of the scene where the narrator's brother gets caught in the mass exodus from London. Still, there are some noteworthy things that were left out, like the dead Martians that didn't survive impact, the Martians constructing the tripods, the red weed, and the Martians consuming the blood of human beings and discarding the drained bodies. That's one of the more harrowing scenes in the book, and really, I'm not surprised that in 1953, they had to leave it out, making the Martians come to Earth solely for the habitat with no use for the humans. The film also expands the invasion, where the original novel is England-centric, isolated by both circumstance and design. The film makes it clear the whole world is involved in this war, with the machines attacking on all fronts and winning. The situation seems even more hopeless. England does get a special mention, though. Hardwicke, as narrator, refers to the strategic significance of the British Isles and the importance of maintaining open lines of communication with them. I did feel very aware of the similarities to Independence Day. There are a lot of them. a foolishly optimistic welcoming committee gets blasted, the aliens travel in aircraft that double as weapons with impenetrable shields, recognizable landmarks get destroyed, countries unite in the fight against a common adversary, the alien aircraft is nuked to no avail. When asked what to say to the aliens, one of the locals says, "Welcome to California," while Will Smith's character punches an alien and says, "Welcome to Earth," and resolution comes in the form of a virus, in one sense literal, in the other figurative. You can call these similarities homages, or you can say that Independence Day was a shameless ripoff. I still love the movie and always will, so I know where I stand. Certainly The War of the Worlds, both the book and the 1953 film, paved the way for a score of alien invasion movies and TV shows. 1951 gave us The Day the Earth Stood Still's Interplanetary Warning and The Thing from Another World's Hostile Extraterrestrial, but this was the first big screen depiction, to my knowledge, of a worldwide invasion, and one that comes very close to being successful. Though it's not the first apocalyptic film, that honor most likely goes to 1916 Danish film The End of the World, it's possibly the first to show us so much of that imagery we've come to associate with the genre: mass evacuations and hysteria, looting, mobs, empty streets littered with trash, and a man running around an eerily silent city. The War of the Worlds got an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, and not enough can be said about the visuals, the sound design, and the special effects. I read that roughly 70% of the budget was spent on special effects. Most of those effects were added in afterward, so the actors didn't know what exactly their characters were responding to and looking at. That's not so strange in the age of green screen, but it was quite unusual in 1953. In addition to the floating machines with the death rays and skeleton rays, the effects department also had to design the electronic eye, which, okay, once you see it as a little face, you can't unsee it. I wish I could, but that's all I see now is a funny little face. The Martian Vision reproduction, with the humorous close-up of Anne Robinson, the electronic umbrella effect, the burning effects, and the creature effects. There's speculation about the Martians' bodies, but we see them very little. That's probably for the best, as the alien is more frightening in theory than in fact. The only Martian we get a good look at, and that's very brief, is surprisingly short and a little odd, almost juvenile. I wondered if the top-heavy, gangly-limbed creature design was an influence on Steven Spielberg when he made E.T. I'm all blasé about it now, thinking that's the superior intelligent life form, that goofy little thing running away waving its hands in the air and screaming. But trust me, that scene where it puts its sticky-looking fingers on Sylvia's shoulder was yet another thing that scared me when I was a kid. I don't remember if it kept me up at night, but I wouldn't be surprised. There's also standard camera work and photography that I find very effective. That slow push in on the meteor as the three men approach it that I mentioned before. The flattering angles from which the heat ray projector is photographed. The cool shot near the end from the perspective of the machine's ramp showing the hesitant crowd looking in. These shots aren't so flashy as the effects, but they add to the film's creative visual appeal. I'd also encourage you to check out the methods they use to come up with all the different sound effects. It's fascinating stuff, and many of these sounds would be reused in later films and TV series, most notably Star Trek: The Original Series. The War of the Worlds, like 1958's The Fly, which I reviewed in October, is another movie that I saw as a kid, but for whatever reason, over time, I started to underappreciate. Rewatching it, though, I'm amazed by how fresh it looks and sounds. It is an awesome spectacle, and one of the must-see science fiction classics of the 1950s. A number of you have already told me that you love this movie, and I would very much like to hear more of your thoughts on it, so please go ahead and share those in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this surprisingly lengthy review of The War of the Worlds, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching!